Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, emergency response, crisis management, and anything that can be related to those fields. As always, I know I've said it many times on this show, I'm an avid reader, and I love going to bookstores and checking, some sites online. I won't name them, but sites online for new books and new ideas and thoughts, anything that gets me thinking and looking into new topics. If you're a long-time listener, you've heard me mention a few times about project management. I have two career paths and, allot, obviously 21 years in business continuity, but I've had about 12, 13 in project management. And I happened a little while ago come by a book that as soon as I saw the title, I knew I got to get it and I got to talk to these people and get them on the show. The book is entitled Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. And I'm very pleased to have the authors of that book, Ralph Kliem and Gregg Ritchie. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome.
Well, Alex.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Ralph, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little about yourself, what you do, and where you got to today.
Okay, sure. I'd be like to, Alex. My name is Ralph Kliem, as you mentioned, and I've been in business continuity off and on with a major Fortune 500 firm, both as a corporate auditor for 10 years, as an IT auditor, operations auditor, and also as a business continuity professional with this company. I've also was a major operations officer in the military many years ago, but that laid the groundwork for me to get involved in interest in business continuity and disaster recovery and those type of issues over the years. And so that's a little bit about my background. I also have the certification. I'm a certified business continuity professional, and I also have a PMP as well. So,
just for our listeners, in case they're not familiar with that designation, what does PMP stand for?
Project Management Professional.
So, Gregg, how about yourself?
Well, thanks for having us on today, Alex. My background as it relates to business continuity planning and project management goes also back into the military. I spent my entire young adult life in the United States Navy Seabees, which is the construction force of the U.S. Navy. Within that time frame, I spent quite a few years working with different disasters, disaster recovery training, going through the various processes that you all have to go through when things go wrong and go awry. Project management, I've been doing project management since I graduated high school in the late 70s, and marrying these two things together into this book was just a perfect marriage. I, too, like Ralph, am also a PMP or a project management professional and have been doing that for 38 plus years.
Well, great. Between the two of you, I know I've got the two perfect people to talk about this. I know on past shows, like I said earlier, I've talked about the two, if you want to be a good BCP person, have some project management experience, get some training in it. So when I saw the book, I just knew I had to reach out to you guys. So it's a great book for anyone out there. There's lots of information. We're going to be touching on some of this. My first question to both of you is, how did you meet, and how did you decide to put this book together? Like, what prompted you to write about this?
Is that directed to me or is that directed to Gregg?
Either one can answer. I'm sure you both might have some different points.
Well, for me, I was putting for this company, I was for the major airplane programs, putting together the business continuity plans, managing it as a project manager and working for senior executives. And I have to say that I decided I wanted to write a book about the principles that I learned in the process of both receiving training and giving training in the field. And so I know Gregg he and I are very proficient in the area of project management, and I know he had some experience. So I contacted Gregg to help me in putting this book together. And so we hit it off professionally well, personality well. And so it was, as he uses the word, it was a great marriage, or a good marriage, and it still is.
Gregg, how about you? What prompted you to want to get involved with this?
Well, Ralph and I actually met through our professional training, our respective professional training parts of our career. We met through a company that we had both done training for. We had very similar backgrounds, and so just as Ralph just put it, our personalities just started to click. And not only do I consider Ralph to be a great colleague that I can call upon as a sounding board, but he's also a great friend. And we do talk quite often, and we were talking about a book that he was writing, and I was very impressed with the fact that, Ralph had written, at the time that I had met him, I think something like 14 or 15 books already. I had already written 2 or 3 books on Microsoft Project, the software, and I was wanting to expand. And I do tell the story when we do the live seminars. I tell people that I had just mentioned in passing that, hey, Ralph, the next time you write a book, I'd like to join. And then 2 weeks later, I get an email with this great big long proposal that Ralph put together, and he's got my name all over the place. And it's like, okay, I mentioned it in passing, and all of a sudden there it is. So be careful what you wish for. You just might get it.
Well, that's great. So let's jump into some of the book content. One of the chapters, areas you call applying project management. Well, can you define one of the pieces in there? Can you define what's a program and what's a project? I know from experience working in both, some people just use that term, to mean the exact same thing, and they're not, right?
Go ahead, Gregg. You want to tap
it? Okay, thanks, Ralph. No, they're not. A project, by its definition, is a temporary thing that you're doing to get something new or something that hasn't been done before done. That's a project. Like you build a deck on your house. That's a project. You do something else in your house, like upgrade a kitchen. That's a project. It's temporary. It's done. Once it's done, it's over with. A program, on the other hand, is more of a collection of various projects that they all have one end goal, one final outcome. And programs can be ongoing. And I always use a very simple example to explain the difference between programs and projects to people. And I use like an auto manufacturer, take General Motors, Ford, it doesn't matter which manufacturer, but they have an SUV program, a sport utility vehicle program. Well, within Chevrolet, there's like 9 or 10 different SUVs out there, and that's a program because most all SUVs have the same platform. Like a Chevy Suburban and an Escalade, they're on the same platform. So they've got this program, and this program is made up of a bunch of projects. And so you've got you have your body project, you have your frame projects, and all of this stuff gets put together so that the end goal of the program is to have something that is either ongoing, or a program could also be temporary as well. They all are aimed at strategic objectives, though. And so that's the difference between a project and a program.
So what are some of the, with relation to business continuity planning programs or business continuity management or whatever term you want to use, what are some of the key deliverables that those programs would deliver? Or you can use project and program as well. Like the program would deliver this, and the project would be that.
Right. I'll take that one on. Basically, under a business continuity program, there's one of the things that you have to do is put a governance structure in place, and you need to have a charter, just like you would have in any major program. And you would have also, you got to identify the key stakeholders. And have policies, procedures in place. And also, what you want to do is be able, probably most importantly, is to have the program produce, in the end, you're going to have to do a business impact analysis. And once you do the business impact analysis, then you go and fundamentally you end up identifying, what your critical business processes are, and then you can build your business preparedness plans that support those critical business processes. And then, of course, you test the plans eventually, and then, of course, you maintain the plans. Now, as you put those in place, a program management structure is an excellent way to ensure that those business continuity deliverables are going to be implemented throughout the critical business processes, regardless of the size of the organization, whether it's a large company, medium-sized company, or small company. And so business continuity, especially when you're implementing it, is really requires good program management skills. So you'll have a program management office, you'll have a governance structure reporting among the executives down to the business recovery business recovery process leader, or whatever you want to call them at that stage, the person that's responsible for the processes or process, and they get you engaged with the other people that are responsible for executing that process. And in the meantime, you're managing it like any other project. You're planning it, you're executing it, you're getting feedback on how well things are going, and you have reports to different levels of stakeholders. And of course, you want to meet their specific requirements when it comes to information and communication.
So if I'm doing, I've been tasked with doing a business continuity initiative, whatever that may be, BIAs, et cetera. Am I creating my own project management office, or am I reporting to some other project management office? How does that work?
Yeah, what you would do is normally you set up, it depends on the size and complexity of the organization. Some places you would end up having a steering committee, just as you would as a large IT project. I've managed a number of those. And this steering committee might be represented by a series of senior managers or executives. Then you would set up a working group. And then from that working group, the business continuity program would provide status and get guidance from that working group, and make sure that the goals and objectives for that program are being met. And of course, they resolve cross-functional issues, organizational conflicts, those type of things that unfortunately happen in every large organization.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm doing, like I said, I'm tasked with a BCP initiative of some sort.
Uh-huh.
And Greg, you can chime in here too anytime. Where do I start? If I've been tasked with creating a program, where's the starting point? What's the first thing I should do? I know you gave some great examples here, Ralph, but where do I start?
Yeah, well, if I could add, I guess I jumped a little further down in the details, but what I like to say is that if you got to work with an audit committee or board of directors or some type of organization like that, they may feel that the shareholders may feel that there needs to be some type of reasonable assurance that this program needs to be in place, that if there's some type of event that impacts the company, it can recover. So whether it's natural events or human events or whatever, there's got to be some type of reasonable assurance that the company can recover. So the board of directors may pass a resolution. It may be part of the financial statement that they want to make sure that the company can recover. They can also form a subcommittee to look at business continuity, and they've done their risk assessment, and they know that they're vulnerable in certain areas in the company. So there's a risk assessment as well, and that ties in closely with the BIA. I don't know, Greg, you want to? Oh, and I should add, there's going to be a business case, right? So you got to put a business case to whether or not you think it's worthwhile to implement a business continuity program.
Greg, do you have comments to add?
Yeah, and it's kind of piggybacking on what Ralph said, and getting back to your basic question of where do you start. If you're looking at a program from its true definition, you would have a program, and this would naturally start at the senior levels. You have to have senior management buy-in. You have to have senior management support. Without that, it doesn't matter what you do. Without senior management support, it's not going to work. So you start and you call it your business continuity, you call it your business preparedness program, and within that program, you might break it up into, as Ralph just mentioned a few seconds ago, you might break it up into, okay, these are our disasters related to what can impact us from things that are not within our control as a company. And then these are items that we will deal with that are within our control, within our company, and we mentioned this in the book, that what happens if you have an employee who comes to work and they have tuberculosis and then everybody else is like, I'm not coming into work. Well, that's something that's within the company. And so you might break these up into internal potential incidents and external incidents as well. And from that, and like Ralph said, it depends upon the size of the organization, the maturity of the organization. There's a lot of factors that go into deciding, okay, how do we start this program? And starting the program, in my professional opinion, is half the battle. Deciding what you're going to do is half the battle before you're actually going to get there.
Mm-hmm. And on that, we've actually come to the end of our first segment. We're talking with Ralph Kliem and Gregg Ritchie, authors of Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking with Ralph Kliem and Gregg Ritchie, authors of Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. Greg, in our last segment, just before we went away, you brought up a point that many people talk about at conferences, in hallways, articles, magazines. You see them everywhere, and that's about senior management support. What advice do you have for our listeners on how to get that support and maintain that support, especially when it comes to disaster recovery programs? Because a lot of people really don't understand the value that BCP has, and what it brings. So how do you keep and maintain and obtain senior management support?
One of the things I always say here, Alex, is it's the standard "it depends" answer, because each organization is different. Different organizations look at the value of BCP differently. My recommendation is usually related to, okay, what's the alternative? And so one of the things that I learned through my professional career is that if we just choose not to do something, then what's going to be the outcome? It's almost like the law of physics. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So if we choose not to do this is going to be the outcome. A lot of companies say, well, that'll never happen to us. We don't have to worry about that. Well, the problem is that if you don't worry about that now, then you're going to have to deal with it when it does happen. And so I like to take a very pragmatic approach to this and saying, we can't guarantee that these plans that we're going to put together is going to prevent our company from continuing to run or will shut our company down, but it can have a very, very large impact on the ability for the company to recover. And it's all about the recovery time and how long does it take. So one of the piece of direct advice that I give to people is simply look at your managers and say, okay, let's plan for this, and then if this doesn't happen, then we know that we were ready. But if we don't plan for this, then the outcome is going to hurt us.
I guess that's that saying, plan for the worst, hope for the best.
That's a very common saying that I've heard a lot in my lifetime. I'm not a big fan of that, but it's applicable here.
Ralph, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I think some of the things I might want to add to that is, one, that if you're going to put a business continuity program in place, first of all, you've got to make sure you have good training among the people that are going to be involved in it, and that includes the core team of the project, as well as the business processes that are going to be have been identified. The critical business processes, the people involved need to understand what business continuity is about. So training is an absolute essential. And that
training in what specifically?
Well, you got to gear it toward the executive ranks are going to have a good understanding of what business continuity is. They're not going to get into the weeds like everybody else, because most of them very rarely get below the clouds. And so what they do is you give like a 1 day or a half a day training for them for understanding. Then you do it the next year for middle or lower level management. And then also you have the detailed training with the SMEs and with the people that are actually not responsible, but actually execute the recovery activities and procedures that have been identified or will be identified in the business preparedness plan. Another thing that you have to have is when you put the business preparedness plan together and it's in place for the critical business process, let's say, or a subset of that critical business process, is that you have to get people involved in actually building it. And that includes the executive leadership. Now, how do you do that with the executive leadership? That's the hard part.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you.
and there's several ways to do that. One is, and I know, audit's a bad word, but internal audit can play a great role in making sure that people follow up on their business preparedness processes. And it's more than compliance. It's making sure that they have practice. They do a test and maintain on the business preparedness processes. Another thing that works very well is also with these on the executives, the senior leadership, is once the board and the audit committee considers it one of the top items identified that's on their radar, and that usually starts at the tone at the top, is what they end up doing is making it part of their performance management. So what gets measured, what gets identified, and what is tied to their compensation, that's a good way to get them compliance as well. And then another thing is, of course, periodic reporting up the food chain on how things are going. And so that's important as well.
Oh, very much so. During our break, you brought up a quick little topic that I'd like to bring up here as well. In my younger days, when I worked in the hospitality industry, we always had a divide between the front of the house and the back of the house in restaurants. Front of the house being, the bar and the servers or the wait staff, and the back of the house being the prep staff, the utility workers, and the line cooks, and the chefs.
Uh-huh.
So with business continuity planning programs, you've got IT on one side and BU on the other side.
Right.
And quite a few times there's some tension between the two. So how about some advice from both of you on how can you address that to minimize that tension, and get everyone working together?
Well, I'll let Greg talk about the program or project management side of getting project teams and programs, as stakeholders getting along. But from a specific business continuity side, there's several things that you can do. One is you got to make sure that they're engaged. So when you have meetings, IT has to be there, but they also it has to be stressed that business preparedness or business in business continuity in general is to help the business processes to recover. It's not to make IT recover. Now, IT plays a critical role. There's no doubt about it, but it's in support of that. So they need to be engaged as much as possible in the development of these plans. The other thing is there's got to be sharing of information between the business side and the IT side. So, maybe set up a SharePoint site, although this is not an endorsement for SharePoint, but whatever means that you do have, you want to be able to make sure that the IT and the business side, IT people and the business people know what the left and the right hand are doing, so to speak. And that includes making sure that they attend joint meetings. The other thing that you can do with IT is, and this worked extremely well, is we had emergency preparedness, and these are the guys that put out the fire right away, or they deal with a physical threat in the workplace. And then you've got the IT people, and they got their disaster recovery plans, and you got to make sure that those are all in place too, and support the critical business process. And then you've got the business continuity, the business preparedness side, and they help in making sure all the plans are in place. All these have to work together, and one of the things that I have found out is they use the same words with different meanings. So one of the things that work that I really put a concentration on, and it has worked in other areas as well, is putting together a common glossary. And of course, that common glossary is here. So they agree on what is the definition of a risk. What is the definition of a threat or a hazard or those type of things? Because the jargon can get in the way. And also the processes. And so there's going to be processes and procedures that are going to conflict with each other. And you got to form sub-teams to make sure that you get a resolution to those conflicts. Mm-hmm. And even within critical business processes, by the way, there's touch points. And so you got to make sure that there's coordination among that. So just as a side note.
I tend to call some of those handshakes. When I finish on this, it gets handed over to you and you take it, and you run with it. And you have to do that with all your plans and processes, just like you have to do with an end-to-end business function.
That's right. Yeah.
So Greg, what information should I be sharing from a project management perspective, and how do I do that? What's the best way of doing that?
One of the things that I really like to do is make sure that there's an atmosphere of openness and teamwork, and that's what we're after. This can be done a number of ways. I mean, Ralph just mentioned SharePoint. That's a way to make sure that everybody has access to the information, but one of the things that we all have probably seen in our lifetime is that just because I put it out there doesn't mean people are going to read it. And so that's always been a fairly big problem. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Is that you can make sure that it is talked about on, I won't say a constant basis, but for example, in project management, when we hold a team meeting, risk and issues are a topic at every single team meeting, regardless of what we're actually here to talk about. So we want to talk about risk every single time because it's just too important of an issue to put on to the back burner and say, okay, we're not going to talk about that. And just like Ralph had mentioned just a few minutes ago, having a common vocabulary so that when somebody over here on this team mentions something about, okay, is this an incident? Is it a crisis? Is it a catastrophe? And we explain this in the book. What is the difference between these items? Let's all get on the same page. After having worked in both engineering, construction, commercial boat building, various industries throughout my lifetime, one of the things that I have always found to be a big detractor from getting things done was the vocabulary. And people get hung up on, well, are we calling this this, or are we calling it that? And so that common vocabulary is very, very important as well. But actually, each team is different, so you have to also understand the makeup of your team as well.
So you mentioned risk and issues. From a project management perspective, for business continuity, what is a risk and what is an issue? Because I'm sure you've run into it as well, and I'm sure many listeners have. Anything that happens is an issue, no matter what it is. So what is the difference between a risk and an issue?
It's very, very simple, and this is how I just explain to people. An issue is something that has already happened. A risk is something that has not yet happened, and if it does, it's going to have an impact. So, for example, in my construction projects for years, a risk that could potentially occur was a 50-year rainstorm event. Now, when that risk occurred, was it an issue? Yeah, it was something that happened, something I need to deal with. But a risk becomes an issue when it happens, but an issue is something that's not a risk. It's already happened. And so this is one of the things that I was talking about getting, terminology correct. So, for example, an issue in my construction projects was I have a vendor who is submitting an invoice that has too much overhead. Well, that's something that's happened, something I got to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Ralph, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that sums it up from a program perspective. From a business continuity perspective, pretty much the same thing. But, you've got, I might add that risk can be either positive or negative from
How
a
so?
project. Well, a risk can be something that is positive in terms of you want to maximize a positive opportunity in terms of adopting a new hardware or software that can expedite the life cycle of a project. And so I think I got that right, didn't I, Greg?
I totally forgot the fact that it was both positive or negative.
Yeah, and so that's an opportunity, and if something goes awry, then then it becomes a threat, and of course it's negative. And of course, business continuity is a way to address risks or hazards or threats, whatever terminology you want to use, and it's important to define those, is to be able to deal with those with your recovery plans.
Okay, good, because I know even every day I hear people say, "Oh, this occurred. We got a risk." No, that's an issue. Or they say, "Well, something might occur here so we have an issue." No, that's a risk. So
here's the way to look at it. If you're having a disagreement whether it's a risk or an issue, you've got an issue.
Yeah, that's true, because you don't have a defined glossary,
as
you mentioned earlier. Well, believe it or not, time keeps flying. As we've already come to the end of our second segment, we're talking with Ralph Kliem and Gregg Ritchie, authors of Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the show. We're talking with authors Ralph Kliem. Apologies, Ralph. I've been saying your name wrong. Ralph Kliem and Gregg Ritchie, authors of Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. Gentlemen, and I'll open this to both of you. Earlier in the show, you talked about programs can be ongoing, and so you have to maintain them. When it comes to business continuity management, what are your recommendations for maintaining plans? Because you've got the various risk analyses or recovery plans or emergency response plans, IT plans. How do you maintain those? And if you do have a business continuity management program that's ongoing, how do you maintain that? How do you keep it ongoing and keeping the interest in it so people continue? It's not just a one-time thing. Okay, we got our plan, and everybody runs away.
So, do you want me to tackle that first, Greg, or?
Okay. Yeah, why don't you start in, and then I'll chime in at the end.
Okay, so in terms of keeping the business continuity plan ongoing, some of the things that you have to do is you're going to have to periodically review the risk assessment that led to the development of the program, but you're also going to have to conduct, after you build a business preparedness plan for a critical business process or a subset of a critical business process, you need to go and periodically review it. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. And some of the reasons are people move and leave, or they unfortunately pass away. I've actually had that happen. And so, or they retire, or there's organizational changes, or there's people's phone numbers change, or the members of the people that are involved in the critical business process may have moved on to a different role, and somebody else is there doing the same job, but they haven't been identified. So what you want to do is have a periodic follow-up on the business preparedness plans in place. And so you set up maybe a single point of contact within that business preparedness process, and that person is responsible for maintaining the plans and of course communicating that back to you if you're the project manager or program manager. You also have periodic reports that are sent up to the food chain, from the operational level up to the senior executive, and of course the board of directors, or if they want a lot of visibility on it. There's periodic test and maintain. So you should have, depending on the size of the organization, you should have testing, tabletop exercises, or actual simulations on a periodic basis to make sure that things are up to date. Now, I just want to add another thing, is at the higher level, maintaining the program, again, reporting to senior level management on the status of each of the different critical business processes. How many of those, if it's a big organization, for instance, how many of those have their plans in place? How many haven't done their test? How many of their plans have been updated and considered current? So you got to rely a lot on facts and data. Now, this doesn't have to be, heavily administrative. What it has to do, though, is there's got to be some consistency in the follow-through on putting these plans together. So, and the best way to do that is the people that are at the operational level that are responsible for their plans should keep them updated. And of course, provide to the business preparedness, business continuity organization, the higher level, the program, make sure that that you have the most recent plan as well. Now, I just want to emphasize, notice the word, I want to use the word, these are guides. So they don't have to get down to the basic detail for maintenance. So they can be at a certain level that everybody feels comfortable with. That's why you have sign-offs on the plans that are by some of the key decision makers for a critical business process. So those are ways to keep everything updated and keep the program with some vitality in terms of its existence, so it doesn't become just another administrative task that doesn't really add value to the organization.
Mm-hmm. Greg?
Yeah, one of the things that, and I mentioned this in my introduction, one of the things that I'm probably the most familiar with, and naturally I don't want to turn this into a military thing, but we had a saying in the military, fight like you train and train like you fight. So in keying in on what Ralph just said, making sure that we have the necessary people in place and doing those exercises, that's how you keep not only interest in this going, but that's also how you can make sure that the plans are actually relevant and timely and are up to date. Because if you have something that is not up to date, it's not going to be any use when it comes time to actually implement it. So that's my biggest piece of advice to people, that once you get this program up and running, is don't let it sit on a shelf collecting dust. have those exercises, and some of these could be, with a well-defined plan in place, and the other one could be, okay, let's surprise people and see how they react. So that's just my opinion.
So I've got a question for both of you then, because I've been asked it, and it is a challenge to answer. So I guess I'm kind of challenging a little bit here. If with all these different plans, the emergency, the evacuation plans, the IT recovery and restoration, the business continuity plans, and reviewing threat risk analyses and BIA results and reporting, what are your suggestions on timing of updating this stuff? If you're just the one poor soul who's responsible for the whole thing, what kind of timing would you suggest for that person? And if you're a larger company that has, if you're lucky enough to have a steering committee, what kind of timing would you look at for a larger, group of people who are focusing on BCM?
Well, from my experiences, if you're a large or moderately medium-sized company, however you define those, you should have at least once every year have at least a tabletop exercise. And so everybody sits around the table, basically, essentially talks about the exercise, and the exercise, the call tree, that's the alert system that calls people up and all that, and make sure that the content is still relevant. And you should do that at least once a year. In some cases, if it's a really large critical business process that transcends several functional areas through a large geographical area, of course, that's not going to be practical. You may end up doing it every 2 years. That's why I always mention you should set up somebody with a single point of contact. Now, you might have, this sounds hypocritical or it doesn't make sense, but because of a business process, critical business process is so large, you may have within each of those subsets of that critical business process a single point of contact. So you have multiple single points of contact, and they're responsible for that person is responsible for maintaining that plan on a regular basis. So if there's turnover, and of course, hopefully this is automated, you have some type of tool that captures the plan, and they can go in and update it, or the business continuity organization can do it for you, is if there's name changes, number changes, organizational changes, all these things can have significant impact on the quality of the plan. And again, the plan is just, it guides you. The best example I can have is in the military. I had a West Point officer reporting to me when I was executive officer. The CO was gone, and this was a Hawk missile unit. And the guy says, you're violating field manual so-and-so. And I looked at him and said, right now, I don't really care what the field manual says. This is what we need to do, and this is what we got to do. Now, I did know about the field manual. So it's the same principle here. If I have car problems, I'm not going to probably pull out the manual on how to operate the car at that time. But I will be familiar with some of the features and functions and critical aspects of the car, that if it looks like if something turns red on the dashboard, I'm probably going to say, I'm going to have to pull over and call not 911, take that back, call AAA or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Greg, do you have anything to say regarding timing of maintaining some of these plans? Well, all of these plans, not some of them, but all of them.
No, Ralph pretty much covered that there. The size of the organization, again, is probably one of your critical factors. Mm-hmm. If you're not lucky enough to have a team of people, then he covered a kind of the timing of when you would actually pull these things out and look at them. If your company is small enough to where you have one person doing this, then that person is going to have to determine the timing based upon what senior management is looking for. So if senior management is looking for this one person to say, okay, you're the one that's in charge of it all, then senior management should also tell that person how often these plans should be put into play. Now, one thing I will tack onto this is that there are several environmental factors that have to be considered here, in my opinion. Number one would be the geographical location as to where you're at. So naturally, if you're in the Gulf area, you're probably going to want to look at your hurricane plans probably once a quarter rather than once a year, and just make sure that everything is there. And companies, they grow, they expand, they contract, and so all of these other factors that come into play. So if we had a plan in place for an evacuation, but this evacuation plan was built when we had 10 employees, now we have 50, yeah, you're going to have to look at that again on at least an annual basis, and maybe even sooner.
And I might, if I could, Alex, I'd like to add is that Greg is entirely correct. You know, I have a friend of mine. He has a small firm. It's just him and about 6 people. It's a bookkeeping firm, and you know, he always says, "Oh yeah, I love business continuity and need to have it in place." And then one day he lost a bunch of, got a virus in it. And he was scraping to try to wherever his information was at, and the whole thing. And then it lost pay records and all the other stuff. He finally recovered everything, but he said he lost 2 weeks of productivity trying to recover things. And I kept telling him he needed to put some type of business preparedness plan. It could be simple, you know. And if I could add, if you're a small firm, you're probably even more vulnerable than a big firm, because a big firm has resources, it has efficiency and effectiveness on a regular basis. Not saying that small firms don't, but they're more vulnerable. They can't take the hit as well as a big firm, and because of the financial resources that they have to devote to. So it's almost, to me, it's imperative to have your own, for your own small company, whether it's 1, 2, or 5 or 10 people, to make sure that you can recover as soon as possible. Otherwise, these people, not only do you lose your business, these people lose their jobs. And
That's true.
It has all types of consequences. And so it's very important to just as much for a small company as it is for a medium or large size company.
Well, we only have 2 minutes left. I'll give you 30 seconds each. Greg, can you tell me the one thing everybody should know about business continuity planning and project management? 30 seconds.
The one key thing about putting together a business continuity plan that will help probably ensure its success the greatest is having a plan to put together the business continuity plans. Going at it haphazardly, it's like the old term we used to say back in the computing days: garbage in, garbage out.
Agreed completely. A plan to plan, so to speak. Ralph, 30 seconds. What's the one thing you'd like to make sure everyone knows about BCP and project management?
Right. I would say, it's kind of a hackneyed term now, but I would say be proactive, not reactive. Take the initiative, and even if you don't need a consultant, go to some of the state or the federal government, go up to FEMA, and there is plenty of resources that can guide you to putting together even a rudimentary business preparedness plan if it's for a small company. And of course, there's other opportunities for much bigger companies for that.
Well, great. We've come to the end of our show. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate all your input and your expertise that you shared with our listeners here. I hope everyone listening takes some of these tips and ideas back with them, especially those that may be struggling in their programs. Maybe you found out some reasons why. And I want to remind everyone, if you want to pick up Greg and Ralph's book, Business Continuity Planning, a Project Management Approach. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects. You can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.